This is the Miller philosopher. So nowadays, it's more of a common theme now among many Tolkien fans of varying degrees that the Noldor High Elves of both genders were potentially athletic and well fit, as Galadriel has been described in some of Tolkien's writings that have come more to light as being athletic and very insightful when it came to strategy. However, this wasn't a newly discovered facet of Elven or even Noldor culture, because there was already one character written into the main story who was already written this way: Galadriel's cousin, Aredhel, the White Lady of the Noldor and daughter of Fingolfin. When I first came upon her story, I was very surprised and also rather sad after I got through with it, because, in many ways, she seemed to be the anti-Galadriel, if you will, or at least how the more famous cousin is often portrayed. And I wanted to look at why Aredhel was so often forgotten or little mentioned among the stories of the High Elves in Middle-earth, because there's depth and complexity to her themes, as well as the potential of what she could have been. Well, it's acknowledged now, more so, that Galadriel in her younger millennium years was ambitious and stubborn, like Noldor were famous for. She was still considered more insightful and wiser than most of the other of her clan, including her uncle Fëanor, which says a lot. Aredhel would still be considered the opposite of that. You see, Aredhel's theme is basically one of rebellion, and I can honestly see her as being a punk elf if there was such a thing. The Silmarillion says that in Valinor, she was just as self-willed, but also rode openly with her cousins, the sons of Fëanor. And this from the get-go tells you a lot about her and her story. While athleticism is the trait that both Elfwood cousins share, their temperament was not. The two sides of High King Finwë's family did not get along very well for the most part, so that their highest ranking members would openly associate with each other was probably seen as an irritation pre-Fëanor's exile. Galadriel may have been ambitious and even slightly hot-tempered, but she was still loyal to her familiar faction. She had no love for Fëanor, as we all know, and, by extension, arguably, her cousins. Aredhel, in contrast, I can actually say, did not give a fuck. I think the reason she is not mentioned among the leaders of the Noldor Rebellion, in universe anyway, is because she's too independent and self-willed by even Noldor standards. That is, she's obviously loyal to her father because she follows him into exile, and even has somewhat of a, how shall we say, strained but loving relationship with her brother Turgon. However, she always was one to make up her own mind on whom she wanted to associate with and what she wanted to do with her life. And while Galadriel slowly starts her transition into becoming the person we see in the Third Age, after she comes into Middle-earth and Doriath, Aredhel at first seemingly doesn't change at all. If anything, I would say that she actually doubles down on her Noldorness, if you will. Yet, what is interesting about her is that in her rebellious years, she is never malicious or expresses any hatred towards anybody, ironically. Something I think most of the Noldor lords were pretty much guilty of on both sides of the family. And this is ironic for all the flack her character usually gets, because she doesn't have any of the major telltale red flags like her cousins and brothers do. That is, imminent violence. It is an underappreciated thing that I think deserves its own video, but the internal rivalry among the elf lords of the Noldor was very intense and escalates into becoming very bitter. Sticking to the point of this video though, this is expressed in an argument between Turgon and Aredhel in Gondolin. Aredhel apparently had been doing the good girl bit for a little bit too long, and she felt that she needed to get out and basically touch grass, I guess you can say, from the self-isolated Sacred Kingdom of Gondolin, and do what she does best: explore and hunt. That was, after all, one of the major reasons why the Noldor left Valinor in the first place, after all. This was a time of peace, so it wasn't like there was any kind of major threats that were perceived, with a couple of exceptions of some areas in and around Beleriand. Turgon at first refuses because 1. Gondolin is supposed to be secret, even among the other Noldor, and 2. Just brotherly concern. However, Aredhel wasn't having any of it, even though her brother tried to pull rank on her. And she finally wears him down and consents to the condition that if she goes with a personal guard, and that she does not go to see her cousins in the east of Beleriand. And right there you see that underlying intense division. On the one hand, Turgon knows his sister very well, and whom she used to hang out with, and, like any older sibling trying to protect their younger one from bad influences, forbids it. Yet, on the other, it also shows how, on a political level, that even under peaceful circumstances, the two families did not associate with each other. It was an unspoken yet well-known policy and agreement between them, and I think it was sometimes said by the Edain and the Sindar that while they might be afraid of Morgoth in the north, they were just as equally worried about their Noldor allies breaking out into civil war because of their constant feuding. And this is where Aredhel finds herself in the middle of, and I think again probably reaffirms her life choices up to that point to just concern herself with her own life rather than the larger politics of her family. As we all know, her adventure beyond the confines of Gondolin goes south the moment she decides to openly disregard their agreement and ride east anyway, only to then get lost and separated from her escort. Aredhel's relationship to the Sindarin elf lord cousin of High King Thingol, Ael, always perplexed me because there's a hint of loaded controversy here. Essentially, did she really consent to the marriage, or was she assaulted? Or perhaps not assaulted, but magically drug-induced, I guess you can say. Which still leads to non-consent? Because of the sensitive nature of this, I did a little bit deeper than usual into the actual behind the scenes of the story, as much as I can find at least. And the only thing I really found was that Tolkien actually originally planned to have Ael assault Aredhel and then force her into marriage, but later changed his mind to not wholly unwilling, and that all elves were not capable of sexual assault. Thank God. Hence the nebulous nature of this particular chapter. Therefore, I think to consider from an in-universe perspective, Aredhel, being fit as she was and being a high elf to boot, I don't think could be overpowered by any Sindar elf, if I'm being totally honest. Especially one who spent all his time in isolation in his own private kingdom of shadows, basically. And that on some level, maybe she felt some attraction to Ael in the beginning and decided to try things out. Again, her rebellious and curious nature acting out. Now, come on. We all know that person who got into a bad relationship and who knew better but did so anyway. We might have even have been that person. Regardless, despite her marriage and even having a son with Ael, Maeglin, and also contrary to popular opinion, Aredhel's rebellious spirit never dies. The Silmarillion says that there were enchantments in place that affected her, and even later on in the miserable marriage with a bigoted husband, I think it's implied she stayed largely because of her care for her son Maeglin. So basically, she suppressed that part of herself to take care of her son. Even though, as well, Ael also had guards trying to keep her from leaving because of his intense insecurity and jealousy of the Noldor. And this is the spirit which is eventually rekindled by Maeglin as he gets older and becomes more Noldor in attitude as well as in appearance. I'm not going to go into the details about their escape and trek back to Gondolin, but suffice it to say that when she returns, I think she is a different person, but not in the sense of having learned her lesson, which would be the obvious way to take this, especially after her death. But that rather, I think she has, I guess you can say, matured. She now has someone she loves to care for, her son Maeglin. And this shows in her willingness to sacrifice herself for Maeglin against Ael, who tried to kill him. And ironically, it's Aredhel who confirms pretty much that Aredhel was still as rebellious as ever. It's just that, again, she has someone that she has to care for. And her sacrifice for Maeglin shows that she has evolved from the self-centered person who only worried about doing what she wanted when she wanted, but now had the ability and empathy to care for other people besides herself, and willingly sacrifice herself in the process, and perhaps even more stunningly, to do so without hatred. Essentially, none of Aredhel's experiences changes who she fundamentally was, but just added further nuance that wasn't there before, because, like I said, she never took any responsibility as a Noldor elf lord because she wanted her independence. And you can't really be that independent if you got others depending on you, especially your own family. So, back to the original question. Why is Aredhel scarcely remembered and when compared to Galadriel? On the one hand, I think it may be that her story just gets caught up in the larger cautionary tale that is the Noldor of the First Age. That their ambition and self-will led to unwise choices and resulted in calamity. On the other point, there's just a simple answer that she died and just never made it that far like her cousin did. End of story. But I think the answer largely lies in the reader's own biases. I can see the first point. She definitely follows the Finway tradition of making rash decisions and being stubborn as hell. Galadriel's one advantage was that she spent time in Doriath away from her Noldor kin. Thus, her ego, ambitions, and rivalries with her cousins weren't fed as much like the rest of the family. And she learned a different perspective on life and other areas thanks to the Maiar queen, Melian. And, as well, Doriath was a protected realm, while Melian was still in Middle-earth, that not even Morgoth could penetrate. So, for the most part, Galadriel was pretty much safe to basically learn and just become a better person, I guess you can say. Aredhel, in contrast, was still in the thick of the Noldor culture, and the only real point where she starts to basically see things differently is after her son is born. But even then, her previous choices also had unforeseen consequences. And now let's speak to the Oliphant in the room. Would Aredhel been better off had she not been so rebellious and just listened and remained comfortable in Gondolin? Well, she would still be alive, for sure. But I don't think her death was inevitable as a result of a good or bad choice, strictly speaking. Because there are many good characters in this universe that make good choices but still lead to bad outcomes, or at the very least, not the best ones, I guess you can say. Such as, for example, the creation of Rohan by Gondor in the Third Age, which led to the further displacement of the Dunlendings who were native there, and which then furthered their internal blood feud with Rohan, and by extension, to a degree, Gondor. And remember that Aredhel, for all her punk tendencies, never hated anyone, even her own family, when encouraged by them to do so. And that's why I thought Aredhel's story was sad as a separate narrative from the larger Noldor narrative. There was potential in this person that was just never fully realized. What would she have been like had she survived the First Age, the fall of Gondolin, and the War of Wrath? Would she have gone on to live with the rest of her Noldor kin in Lindon? Or perhaps migrated to Eregion and perhaps met up with her cousin? Now that's a conversation I wanted to read, given how much the characters were so opposite in many ways, but also had to share similarities, and for sure would have been more similar than dissimilar by the Second Age. Would Aredhel have become equally as powerful as Galadriel, given that they're about the same age? Would she still be as aggressive and on the forefront of things, even the battlefield, given her Noldor nature? And, dare I say, would she have become the first Noldor High Queen after Gil-galad's death at the end of the Second Age, being the sister of a previous High King, and thus outranking Galadriel and Elrond, and being the only surviving lineage of the Noldor High Kings of Middle-earth? Intriguing possibilities. But, what do you guys think? What was your perception of Aredhel's story? Do you think that she would have been a different person had she survived? Do you think that all she is just a cautionary tale? Let me know in the comments below, but otherwise, this is the Miller Philosopher. Y'all have a good day.